like, jazz hands instead. Allie. She's hoping for some French fries and popcorn. Oh my God, isn't this theater amazing? It's like I can hardly concentrate. So, the reason I do these talks about my dad is really very simple. I was a daddy's girl. He was truly one of the most generous, loving, kind-hearted, attentive, fabulous people that I've known. And, it's not just because he was my dad. I wrote his biography in 1999. I interviewed 250 people, and literally not one person had a bad word to say about him. Not even like a polite bad word. To be a Hollywood actor, to be somebody who is in an industry that is all about ego, and to be remembered with such love by literally every single person that he met, that's a gift. And I think the reason why is because he used his celebrity as a means of giving back. So he understood that he'd been given this gift of this big life with this big platform, and he thought, how can I use it to give back? He understood that as an actor, if you don't have a connection with your audiences, then you don't have a career. And my dad had a 65-year career thanks to his fans. And he's been gone now 25 years, it'll be this year. And I started a Facebook page for him about 3.5 years ago, and he has 245,000 followers. And he's been gone a long time. That tells me how loved he is. So, the reason I think he was such a great person to his fans, first of all, was because he was a fan himself. When he first came to Hollywood, he was so over the moon that big movie stars would invite him to their house. One of the first movie stars to befriend him was Joan Crawford. And he told me the story that she invited him over to a potluck. Now, my dad was from Missouri. So in Missouri, a potluck meant you brought like deviled eggs or, the leftover meatloaf from the day before. So he made some deviled eggs, and he made some pretty awesome deviled eggs. And he came over to Joan Crawford's house, and there she was with like pheasant under glass. It was not a Missouri potluck by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, she took one look at him and she said, "Oh, Vinny, should we have a swim together in the pool?" And my dad, totally innocent, was like, "Sure." And he dove in and they swam together. And she would invite him over and to all sorts of things after that. And he was always saying, "I just never knew why she liked me so much." Now, he was stunningly gorgeous, my dad, when he was a young man. He was 6'4", he was in great shape, he was a nice man. I was like, "Dad, seriously? You don't know why she liked you?" But that's how sort of, naive and sweet and self-effacing he was. So, he had an incredible career. It began kind of as a fluke. He auditioned for a play on a bet while he was a graduate student in art history in London. And he got the part. And then the next play at the same theater company, he got the part again, 2 parts in a row. And that play turned out to be the biggest hit on the British stage. And he was named Male Newcomer of the British Theatre in 1935. And the female newcomer that year was Vivian Leigh. And so an American producer came over and decided to buy this play as a vehicle for his leading lady. And she was Helen Hayes, the first lady of the American theater. And the playwright refused to sell it to this producer unless he took Vincent Price with it. So Vincent Price went from being a graduate student in art history to being the biggest star in the biggest Broadway play of the season. So Hollywood came calling, and they offered him $1 million movie contract. Now this is 1936. And in 1936, $1 million was a lot of money. And so my dad wanted the advice of Helen Hayes about what he should do about this. And she asked him one question. She said, "Do you think you know your craft?" And my dad thought about it, and he said, well, no, I've been in like 1.5 plays. How would I know my craft? And she said, precisely. If you don't want to be a flash in the pan, if you want to have a long career, don't take the movie contract. Learn your craft. Learn how to be an actor. So he spent 2 years on Broadway, and every summer when Broadway closed, because there was no air conditioning, he would do summer stock. So by the time he finally went to Hollywood, he really knew his craft. But Hollywood wanted my dad to be a handsome leading man, and he wanted to be a character actor. The actors he admired were Spencer Tracy and Jimmy Cagney and Edward G. Robinson. But you know, he didn't look like them. He looked like Errol Flynn or Robert Taylor. He was gorgeous. And so he ended up getting cast in these sort of weird assortment of parts, and he hated it. So he kept having to go back to the theater to figure out how he could be a character actor. And it was in the early 1940s that he got cast in a play called Angel Street. And Angel Street later became the movie Gaslight. And it's about a man who basically convinces his wife that she's going insane. And he said the first time he got up on stage and he heard the audience hiss and boo, he felt like he had come home. He knew how to be a villain. He could be a gothic villain. He could be 6'4", elegantly dressed, eloquent, articulate, intelligent, and that's really became his bread and butter. In the 40s, he did movies like Dragonwick, which was a really wonderful film as a precursor to the Poe films. But he also did wonderful films like Laura.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the 1950s that he did his first horror film, and that was House of Wax. Now, House of Wax came about really quite by accident. Prior to that, he was gray-listed during the McCarthy era. Now, in the McCarthy era, many people were blacklisted. They were blackballed. They were run out of town in Hollywood. They lost their careers, they lost their livelihood. Some of them committed suicide or fled the country. But many more people were gray-listed, which meant that the studios were encouraged not to hire them. And so my dad didn't work for a year and a half. And when he finally got his name cleared, he was given the choice between a play on Broadway, and that's normally what he would have taken, or this movie about an artist who has all of his work destroyed. And it was filmed in this new technology called 3D. And my dad, who could barely figure out how to turn on a radio, he knew that technology drove Hollywood. And so he took the part, which really compelled him, and the new technology. But he had no idea it would become the success that it did. And he maintained that the reason it became such a success was because of a physical anomaly on the part of the director. Andre de Toth had one eye, which meant literally he could not see in 3D. If you have one eye, you can't see in 3D. So the rest of the 3D directors were all concerned about the gimmicks, and he wanted to make a movie that had a beautiful storyline, and that's what he did. The movie went on to play for over a year in first-run movie theaters. My dad couldn't believe it. And literally a year later, he was doing a play called Richard III on Broadway. And there he was, still, on the marquees over Times Square. Vincent Price stars in House of Wax. So we decided to go in and see if there was anyone still there. And the movie theater was actually packed. So we thought, okay, I'll sit behind these two teenage girls. Let's see how they like it. Well, of course, they were terrified. You know, he's like dipping people in vats of wax and leading you through the dark, and they're holding on to each other. He loved it. He's like, oh, they love it. And that's when his little inner demon took over, because when the credits ran, he leaned forward and said to them, "Did you like it?" That was my dad's sense of humor. So as you can hear, I'm struggling a little with my voice tonight. So I'm going to just share a few more stories, and then I think what I'm going to do is open it up to questions. But I want to share a few kind of favorite stories of mine from my dad, and the kind of sense of humor he had. People often ask me if I ever visited my dad on set. And my most distinct memory of doing that was Theater of Blood. I went to see him in Theater of Blood, and we lived in London, and we had a driver who drove us out to the set. And as we were getting further and further away from London, I remember thinking, like, this is a weird neighborhood. Everything looks sort of burnt out and run down. And the driver was Cockney, and I couldn't understand a word he said. My mother, who was English, was chatting away, so I was kind of spaced out, looking out the window. And all of a sudden, we pull up to these, like, old, ratty warehouses. And the driver steps out, and he opens the door for me, and I get out into this, like, deserted, burnt-out area. And all of a sudden, all of these creepy, scary people run up to me and start pawing me and touching me and asking me for money, and they've got, like, scabs and no teeth, and they're filthy, and I was like, and then my dad swept out of the building and he said, "You people, get away from her, that's my daughter." And he put his arm around me and he shepherded me back in, and that was it. I thought, oh, my dad's my hero. It wasn't until I saw the movie that I realized those were the extras, and he had that was my dad. He loved practical jokes. When I was a little girl, we were going to New York, and I had my first loose tooth. And I was so nervous that the tooth fairy wouldn't know where to find me so I could get my nickel. And I remember saying to my dad, "Is the tooth fairy gonna find me? Is the tooth fairy gonna find me?" And he said, "Absolutely, no worries. You know, she'll know to find you in New York." So I go to sleep, and I lose my tooth. I go to sleep and I put my tooth under the pillow, and I don't sleep very well because I'm totally worried about the tooth fairy. And the next morning I wake up, I lift up the pillow, I'm so excited for my nickel. No, it's a disgusting, corroded denture, which he had been saving for, you know, and brought to New York. So that was my dad. I want to tell you the story of how my dad met Tim Burton. He was doing a Disney movie called a Disney TV show called Read, Write, and Draw. And it was teaching kids how to tell stories. And so he heard about this young animator who was a huge fan, and they asked if he would come meet him. And my dad said, yeah, of course. So we went down, and there was this guy, sort of, you know, spiky black hair, and he was this incredible illustrator, and he showed my dad this project he was working on with beautiful black and white illustrations and this wonderful Poe-like poem. And it was about a little boy named Vincent Malloy who wants to grow up to be Vincent Price. And my dad agreed to narrate it for Tim. And Tim returned the favor by writing Edward Scissorhands for him. You know, my dad had a 65-year career. And in that 65-year career, he did so many films and TV shows, and he always was driven by work. But he also loved giving back. Over the last week, I've had two beautiful examples of how my dad gave back wherever he went. I was doing a talk in Bloomington, Indiana last week, and there was a guy in the front row who met my dad when he was 12 years old. He went to one of my dad's lectures. My dad lectured on art all over the country, 60 cities in 65 days, every year for 30 years on art, because he felt art was so important and he wanted to encourage young people to be artists. And this 12-year-old boy went to one of those lectures, and he went up to my dad afterwards and he said, "I love art, I want to be an artist." So my dad wrote him a postcard all the time from museums and just sent him little postcards of pieces of art. Whenever he was giving a talk within a 200-mile radius of Louisville, which is where this boy was from, he would send him a ticket. And when he was old enough, he commissioned his first piece of art. He was sitting there in the front row, and he had come to Bloomington years before to hear my dad, and now was coming to hear me. The next night, I was in Evansville, Indiana, and there was a girl there who said her uncle had my dad had befriended her uncle, and I know her uncle. Her uncle also met my dad when he was a kid, wanted to be an artist, told my dad that. He was a kid who had a number of really serious illnesses and almost died over a course of major surgeries. And so he was from LA, so my dad would go down and visit him, and they would paint together. He has a painting that half the painting is by him and half the painting is by my dad. And when he was old enough, his first commission was from my dad. He's now a wonderful children's book illustrator. And the message of those books is that the only legacy that matters is the legacy of love. So, it's true. She agrees. So, the reason I come out and I do these talks is because, you know, we live in a world where celebrity is valued so much, or at least idolized. But my dad never used his celebrity for his own gain, other than, you know, it did get him to living in some pretty awesome places where he could buy some great works of art, which was his passion. He used his celebrity to give back. He used his celebrity to encourage people to follow their dreams. He used his celebrity to encourage people to give back to the world, to behave a little better, to be kinder to one another. And to me, you know, right now, there's so much talk in the world about us against them. And my dad played the ultimate us against them guy. He was the ultimate bad guy. But I think the reason that we can all watch Vincent Price and not mind being scared by him is that we know that underneath, he's a really good person. And we know that underneath, he's having such joy in what he's doing. And I think it's why we all can go into the dark and not be too scared by Vincent Price, because we sense that there's someone pretty amazing underneath there. He was that amazing. And so the fact that Tim Burton gave my dad back what my dad had given so many people, a gift that ended his career and introduced him to a whole new audience, is something for which I'll always be grateful. So I'm hoping you guys will have questions that I can answer. I'm gonna perch myself here on the, yeah, there we go.
Does this work?
Yeah, it does. Okay, great. Hi, my